Welcome, welcome, welcome to what should be a very interesting slow chat. There is certainly no shortage of things to talk about. It's been a very busy couple of days, and whilst I haven't been doing slow chats while I've been in production of Battleground Melbourne, I've been very caught up with other things, as you can imagine. I felt that a moment like this, I kind of needed to do one. I needed to I guess cut through a little bit. There's a lot of stuff going on online as well as in reality. A lot of people have got the right idea about it. Some people have got the wrong idea about it. I'm not an authority on how Parliament works, so I've actually spent some time chatting with Emily from Voice for Victoria. So shout out to Emily. Thank you for your time. And I've been texting back and forth with Catherine Cumming to find out what happened with her and why she did what she did, rather than jumping to conclusions. Let's talk to these people. They talk to us, unlike most. So instead of immediately demonizing and marginalizing and saying, you've betrayed us, let's actually take a moment to talk to these people. And that's what I've done today, to try and understand the reasoning. There is always a reason why people do what they do. However, there is no reason why I have come in here without a glass for my whiskey. So I'm just going to quickly call my wife, who is in the other room, and ask her if she can bring me a glass of my whiskey, rather than running out and leaving you here all on your own. No one wants that. Turns out it's been a while since I called my wife, because we live in the same house, so I never need to call her. All right, let me try this. Hey, babe, could you bring me a whiskey glass, please? Because I've gone live and I forgot to bring a glass.
Oh, I guess.
Thanks. See you soon. All right. She's not thrilled. She was comfy on the couch. Okay. Marcus is with me. Thank you, Marcus. At short notice, has volunteered his evening to jump in here and be able to do comments and so forth. So, Marcus, I haven't put up anyone's comments yet, so go for your life. Have lots of fun with all of the comments that are there. Okay, someone asked about the cigar. Let me get all of the formalities out of the way. If you've never watched a slow chat before, this is my way of decompressing. And trust me, I need to decompress right about now. And when it comes to decompressing and my mental health, a cigar is one of my absolute favorite ways to decompress. Thank you very much, babe. All right, there you go. Glass has been secured. I have this week, or for this slow chat, I have an Oliva V Milanio. Excuse me, this is in a Churchill. It's a box press. You can see that kind of squarish shape there. Thanks, wifey. Thanks to Topher's missus. Yes, thank you very much. And so I'm going to cut the top off that and light it and enjoy that over the course of tonight's slow chat. I'm going to pair it initially with some Glendronach, traditionally peated. This is a no-age statement. It's not a particularly sophisticated whiskey necessarily, but it's nice. And I quite like it with a more sort of medium, darker flavored cigar. It's not a strong flavored cigar. It's more of a medium, but the flavors are a bit darker. But then if I find that that's not quite doing it for me, I have some Aberlour Abund, which is amazing, but it's 61.2% alcohol. So I probably don't want to start on this, because if I do, we're going to go downhill real quick. Mind you, this is 50% or 48%. So I need to be a bit careful with that too. Okay, so that's what I'm smoking. That's what I'm drinking. I also, of course, have my big mug of black tea, which I always enjoy with my cigars. But now that that's always out of the way, or now that all of that's out of the way, we can actually get to what we are wanting to talk about tonight, which is what in the world is going on. And I'm going to take a little bit of a step back. I'm not going to assume that everyone watching has been across everything and you all know what's going on and you all, you're as much of a political tragic as what I am. That's not a safe assumption to make. So without wanting to bore anybody or talk down to anybody, let me just take a bit of a step back and let's talk a little bit about legislation, how it passes, what process it goes through, what this legislation actually is, why, what's wrong with it, why is everyone so up in arms about it? Before we then actually get to what's going on right now and all the sort of the technicalities of where this legislation is up to and what we can do about it. So we're gonna cover a bit of ground tonight. It's called a slow chat for a reason. So if this is your first time, settle in. We're going to cover some ground. I'm going to answer questions along the way as Marcus puts those up for me. I'll answer those as best as I can. If they're relevant, if they're just a rabbit trail, then you'll have to forgive me. I will just ignore those, because we do have a bit of ground to cover, and I need sleep. I'm working on this doco, and I need sleep. So this is not going to be, I've had slow chats go till after midnight before. That's not going to be tonight, but we do have a bit of ground to cover. So I'm going to get cracking in just a minute. Word of advice for those of you that want to try cigars: light them as slowly as you can. The slower you light it, the better. Oh, I had a question this week. Oh, how can you be smoking cigars all the time when you're trying to sell merchandise and you're asking for donations for the doco, blah blah blah? Like, cigars are expensive. How can you justify smoking them and crying poor at the same time? Well, in my defense, I've never cried poor necessarily, but actually, what most people don't realize is I run a cigar business with a business partner up in Sydney, and so other people buying cigars from us more than pays for all the cigars that I smoke. And also, they're tax deductible now, which is great because I'm obviously sampling and I'm aging these cigars. I've bought an entire box of them, and I need to just see how they progress with age and train my palate a little bit about the aging of cigars. So all my cigars are tax deductible now, and paid for by others. Josh says vaping is so much better for your health. No question. No question. This is not good for my health. I'm not going to pretend otherwise, but it's really good for my mental health. And I did try vaping. I found it deeply unsatisfying. It is the ritual of a cigar. It is the fact that there's a real thing burning. It's like watching a gas fire rather than a log fire. A gas fire is nice, but it doesn't compete with a log fire. It doesn't compete with a campfire. And that for me, that would be the analogy there. Okay, now, bills. What is a bill and how does it pass? Well, a bill is a piece of legislation. Obviously, we all know that. They have to pass through there's a process to how these things move through Parliament House. I'm not going to go deeply into that because we could be here for a while, because it is pretty nuanced and pretty arcane. And like I said, I was on the phone to Emily from Voice of Victoria earlier today, because even though I've been commentating on politics for 12 years, I've never had a reason to have to learn the intricacies of how bills move through Parliament House. It's just never been relevant before. And so even I had to. Mark says, what's the name of the cigar company? It's called The Cigar Professor. You'll find us on Facebook. Um, I've not had, this is not something I've really cared about before. I've not been commentating on a bill that's been hanging in the balance the way that this is now. So I reached out to Emily and I've been reading some other things and learning. But to be honest, there's a lot of detail there that we can kind of gloss over. So let me put it to you in very simple terms. In very simple terms, a bill has to be introduced, a member of the various houses. So we have a lower house, which is the legislative assembly, and we have the upper house, which is the legislative council in Victoria. And I believe they have to start in the lower house. They have to be introduced by a member. They have to be sponsored by a member that says, hey, this is a piece of legislation that we want to push through. And then it goes through a process of being read multiple times. There are opportunities for people to ask questions about it, get answers, etc. And this is where you can get question time that ends up on television. You see the federal question time on the ABC. Understand, though, federal and state parliaments work differently, and each state works slightly differently as well. But it goes through this process of being read multiple times, questions being asked and answered, and then eventually it goes to a vote. And if it has a majority, it passes. If it doesn't, it fails to pass. But there's a lot of opportunity for playing games through that process of multiple readings, through that process of questions and answers. There are many opportunities for playing games, and there's no set timeline for how quickly a bill moves through Parliament. It can vary greatly depending on different variables, who wants it to pass, who doesn't want it to pass, and who believes they have the numbers. If they were to push it through to a vote, do they think they have the numbers yet or not? And all of that can affect how quickly a bill moves through Parliament. So we were told that this bill was going to hit the upper house, the Legislative Council, this week. Here we are at the end of the week. It's been adjourned out till the next sitting week, which is in 2 weeks' time. This sort of stuff happens often enough. Yeah, don't forget to mention the bells, the division bells. Yeah, there's all sorts of theatre that goes on in this. There's almost pageantry that goes on within Parliament as well around legislation. So what that means is that for people like us, and for particularly for those that chose to do a vigil out the front of Parliament House, it can be very frustrating because they've sat there for 3 nights or however long it's been, enduring some pretty unpleasant weather and some pretty unpleasant treatment at times, and there's no resolution. And that doesn't mean that it was for nothing. Can I just say that doesn't mean that your being there was for nothing. It just means that the fight isn't over yet, and we've got to keep on pushing on. I'll get to Adam a little bit later on, Anthony. So your efforts were not in vain. You don't always get the Hollywood ending things don't always, there's no script writer building up to this perfect sort of climactic moment and then a Hollywood ending. That's not how real life works. So let me just go back to my notes. Okay, so this bill passed through the lower house with no problem, and that's not a surprise. The lower house is where we determine who the government get to be. It's burning a little bit lopsided at the moment. I'm just going to heat it up a little bit more to try and correct that. You want to smoke cigars as cool as possible, but sometimes you want to heat them up a bit more just because that way they'll self-correct. So when the government puts forward legislation, it's expected to pass the lower house because they are the government, because they have a majority in the lower house. That's sort of one thing is the other. If the government puts forward legislation, they have the numbers. So that's what happened with this bill. It got rammed through the lower house, passed with flying colors, no problems whatsoever. But that's not a surprise, and it's not a setback in any way, shape, or form. It's exactly how it works. If the opposition puts forward a bill, it's much more difficult for them to get it through. Vicky, I actually don't know. I genuinely, I'm out of the loop at the moment. Much more difficult for the opposition to get a bill through because they don't automatically have the numbers. They need the support of some members of the government, or if it's a minority government, which doesn't happen often in Australia, but we'll talk about that later because we need to make it happen a lot more often. They might get the crossbenchers that are supporting the government to support their particular piece of legislation. But when the government, so someone says, yes, partying. So Lucy, I assume you're talking about at Parliament House. Can you just clarify, Lucy, if you're talking about at Parliament House or not? So the government proposes legislation, rams it through the lower house, no big surprise there. Then it has to go to the upper house. And there are rules around how that has to happen, but then there are also conventions about how long these things should be allowed to take. And they're not hard and fast. And we've seen the abuse of some of the conventions so far. But in terms of actually following the rules, the government has done everything according to the rules of what they're required to do so far in trying to pass a bill. Andrew, if you had a thin cigar for your first time at age 15 and your lung killed you, I would suggest you were probably inhaling the cigar, which is not what you want to do with a cigar. Cigars are about flavor. They're not about the nicotine hit, and they're certainly not about drawing into your lungs. That's a fast way to make yourself sick. So it's reached the upper house. It then has to go through that process, a series of readings, some opportunities for questions and answers. And eventually it will reach the point where it will get voted on, but it's not a hard and fast schedule, and no one knows for sure exactly when that's going to be. But here's the point that we reached today. We reached the point where they were about to go into what I believe is referred to as committee. And again, I'm not an expert on this stuff. I'm learning this as well. So I've had some chats with some people today. My apologies if I get the name of something wrong, but the process I believe is that I'm going to describe to you is completely correct. They go to what I believe is called committee, where it then gets read through. And this is, I believe, the third reading. And members of Parliament, government or opposition or crossbench, they have the opportunity to ask questions. Now, in theory, what happens is the legislation is gone through line by line or paragraph by paragraph. In practice, MPs already know a bunch of it and they're fine with it, and they'll have specific questions about specific paragraphs. So it might jump, forward a little bit, might have to jump backwards, what have you. But ultimately, there is time for MPs to ask their questions. On a piece of non-controversial legislation, there can be zero questions, and it immediately then proceeds to a vote. On something like this, there can be a few hours worth of questions, and on a piece of legislation that someone deliberately wants to delay and wants to make life difficult, then they can stretch those questions out for potentially a very long time. And it can be one of the sort of tactics that can be used within Parliament, although it doesn't usually change the end result. It's more of kind of a bit of symbolism. So what we had today was the expectation that the bill was going to go into committee, and then as soon as committee was finished, it was going to get voted on. That was the expectation of what was going to happen today. We'll talk about what actually happened a little bit later on, but I actually want to stop there. So we've reached today, right? We're up to today. We understand that. I want to talk about the bill itself, because it's very easy for someone like myself to say, oh, this is a terrible bill. This is one of the worst bills, most frightening bills I've seen in a very, very long time. It's all very well for us to be sharing stuff online, etc. But when you have a friend who sincerely says to you, I'm hearing all this stuff about this bill, I don't really get it. What's wrong with this piece of legislation? What's wrong with this bill? Why is everyone so up in arms? You need to be able to actually give an answer off the top of your head without the help of memes and whatever else. So, what is wrong with this bill? Our entire system, and in fact, almost every single government system anywhere in the world, anywhere you care to look, is based on the idea that we are separating power and distributing power across multiple people. You can look at various Republican type systems, whether that's an American style republic or a French style republic, or plenty of other places in the world. Even many monarchies, although by no means all, but if you look at the Westminster monarchy system, yeah, we have a queen at the moment and a king at some point in the future. But they don't actually have legislative power, nor do they really have any practical executive power, even though technically they're the head of the executive, and they certainly don't have judicial power. All those powers have been distributed across other people, and I'll talk more about that in a minute. So even a Westminster monarchy, the Queen of England actually has quite a lot of power taken off her hands, and this happened generations ago, and distributed into this parliament system. And even within the parliament, the power was further distributed, and we'll talk about how it gets distributed in a minute. Most forms of government, most countries in the world have some sort of a constitution, some sort of a system, the design of which is for the explicit purpose of making sure that no one person has too much power. In a nutshell, what's wrong with this bill is that it destroys all of that work and concentrates all of that power that was meant to be distributed into one person. That's the in a nutshell answer. Now, let me go a little bit deeper. The Americans have a very clear way of explaining their system, and I'm going to borrow some of their terminology because it is nice and clear, and it is broadly applicable, and I will Australianize it as we go. We have essentially three branches of government. We have the legislative branch, and that's where Daniel Andrews, and Adam Somyurekt, and David Limbrick, and all these other people, they work in the legislative branch. They write legislation. They write the laws, but they don't enforce the laws, and they don't judge people who are accused of breaking the laws. Those powers have been separated from them. They don't get all of them in one. If they are successfully elected, they get to handle one set of powers. They're powers to write the laws, the legislation. Even there, they have to obey the Constitution. They have to, there's limits on what they're allowed to write. They can't just write absolutely anything. But they always have to write it with the thought in mind that they're not the one enforcing it, and they're not the one judging it. And that places certain limits on their power. The police are the law enforcers, and this is sort of, in American parlance, this would be the executive branch, for which they have the president as the head. So the president is not involved in writing legislation over there, by the way. In much the same way the governor or the governor general in Australia is not involved in writing legislation. They just sign it into law. They give royal assent in Australia. They're acting on behalf of the king or the queen, supposedly. And they give assent, and it becomes law once they put their signature to it, but they didn't get to write it. Technically, they are the head of the executive, and the executive is the law enforcement branch. And the decision as to whether or not someone has broken the law, as to whether or not someone is accused of breaking the laws, is not in the hands of the same people that write the laws. That's in the hands of the police. Then you have public prosecutors and other people that get involved that then introduce it to the legal system, and a judge or a jury, ideally, but the legal system itself determines whether the person accused of breaking the laws by the executive branch actually broke the laws written by the legislative branch. Now, this is done very, very deliberately, because if you put all of that power into one person's hands, we have a word for that. It's called a dictator, right? The separation of powers is what stops someone from being a dictator. And when I say, Dictator Dan, I'm not just using the word as an insult. I'm actually saying this is what he wants to be. He hasn't achieved it yet. But if he got this piece of legislation through, what this does is it allows him to write the rules, to legislate, even though it wouldn't be legislation. He's just empowered himself to make up the rules however he wants them to be. He gets to make the rules. Then he gets to turn around, and on his say-so, certain groups of people could be incarcerated for years. So he gets to accuse somebody of breaking the rules that he made, and then he gets to determine whether or not they're guilty and whether or not they should be punished. That's the very definition of a dictatorship. It is the absolute antithesis of what our system and most systems around the world are designed to accomplish. Our system is designed to separate power. This legislation is designed to concentrate power. Now, he will defend himself and say, oh, but there's oversight. There are various, there's the SARC. No, it wasn't SARC. There's a body that gets oversight over him. And yeah, there's supposedly two different oversight mechanisms already in the legislation. And again, this is an area where Emily from Voice for Victoria is a lot stronger than I am. The practical reality is that the members, or the majority of members on both of those committees, are appointed by the government. The government, so in this case, it would be Daniel Andrews, who has all of these powers, then appoints the people that are supposedly going to hold him accountable? I don't think so. So even the veneer of accountability that he's trying to build into these laws don't actually give accountability. These bodies don't have the power to actually stop him from doing whatever he's doing. Even in the legislation, ignoring the fact that they're owned by him anyway, even in the legislation, all they really have the power to do is to commentate and to say, oh, that we don't like that decision. Okay, what are you going to do about it? In the legislation, they really don't have any power whatsoever. So there's no meaningful oversight. It combines the legislative, executive, and judicial branches into one man with no real oversight. Yeah, so SARC has 7 members, 4 are appointed by the government, which in this case is the Labor Party. Do the math. That's not what accountability looks like. Now, Dan also likes to claim that it's about transparency, that this legislation requires more documents to be tabled more publicly than the current emergency powers. And again, that's a bit of a smokescreen. Daniel Andrews hasn't even been complying with the transparency requirements of the existing legislation. So there's no reason why we would believe that he would actually comply with the transparency requirements of any future legislation. Secondly, he can be as transparent as he wants to be. There's nothing stopping him from tabling all the documents in the world. He doesn't need the legislation to tell him that he has to do X in the interest of transparency. He can just do that, and he chooses not to. So don't get up there and grandstand and pretend that you're all about transparency. So, in a nutshell, what's wrong with the bill? It flies in the face of thousands of years of history and lessons learned. We separate powers because throughout history, we've discovered what happens when you concentrate power into the hands of one man. We made that mistake. We're not going to make it again. This legislation concentrates the legislative, the executive, and the judicial into the hands of one man for him to use without oversight and without any accountability or transparency. That's in a nutshell. That's what's wrong with this legislation. That's why it's incredibly dangerous. And that's why I use the word dictator. I don't throw words around just for the hell of it. I don't throw out words as an insult. I have a reasonably good vocabulary, and I choose my words because I actually put weight on them. When I call him an aspiring dictator, it's because he is trying to give himself the powers of a dictator. That's literally true. When you look at the bill that he's trying to ram through, it gives him the powers of a dictator. He is an aspiring dictator. Now, it doesn't mean that he's going to turn around and start murdering people in the street. People we have this idea that, oh, you're calling him a dictator. You're saying that he wants to murder people in the street. No, I'm not. I'm saying that he wants the powers of a dictator, right? Not every dictator has been a murdering psychopath. Some of them have actually been quite nice to their people over centuries and over thousands of years. We've had kings that have been good to their people. We've had dictators that have been good to their people. I'm not saying he's a psychopathic murderer. I'm saying he wants the powers of a dictator, and that is literally true. That, to me, is an indisputable fact. He is trying to become a dictator. These are lovely, by the way. If you are a cigar smoker and you've never had an Oliva V Milanio, so the Figurado version, slightly different shape of the same cigar, won Cigar of the Year in 2014, and so good. Literally would be in my top 3 cigars of all time. Okay, so the separation of powers, we've talked about that. Where is the bill up to? Well, we talked about where it got to up until today. What happened today? Well, here's what could have happened today. What could have happened today is it would have gone into committee, people would have asked questions, question time would have dragged out because no doubt it would have been quite heated. But eventually, the government would have forced it through to a vote, and they would have got their legislation passed. That's what was happening right up until, what's today, Thursday, right up until Tuesday. And Tuesday, I believe, was when the news broke that Adam Somyurekt had tabled his vaccination papers. It might have been Monday, but I think it was Tuesday. And that would have sent a chill down the spine of Daniel Andrews and his gang of 8 and every member of government. And then when his op-ed was published, I believe yesterday in the Herald Sun, or it might have been today, honestly, all the days are blending into one, I'm sorry, where Adam made his position on this legislation abundantly clear. I mean, he could not have been clearer. Then all of a sudden, the government knew that they were going to have a tied vote at best, 20-20. And that means the bill does not pass in the Legislative Council, the upper house. So now they have to make a decision. Do they put it to a vote anyway and hope for the best? Well, that'd be pretty foolish. They've done a lot of work to get to this point where they actually have an opportunity to pass Daniel Andrews' wet dream and turn it into legislation. They're not just going to throw that away. So now all of a sudden, they need to backpedal and buy some time. And where it had been the opposition, it had been the Liberal Party and other backbenchers, the ones that haven't had a deal done with them. Whilst they have previously been saying, hang on, let's slow this down. Why are we rushing so much? Now all of a sudden it's the government saying, oh, hang on, let's slow this down. There's no need to rush so much. And so it was the government that moved this motion to actually delay the vote and to delay going into committee and the final vote. Now, what was really interesting that happened was people got quite up in arms about Catherine Cumming, MP, supporting their vote or their desire to delay the legislation. And I reached out to her and I said, look, can you break down the thought process here? Because it doesn't look good, right? You're voting with the government, not a great look. And she messaged me back and pointed me in the right direction to where she'd already explained her reasoning, and we've exchanged a few messages since. And fundamentally, it comes down to this. She was concerned because Adam Somyurekt was not in the chamber at the time when the vote to postpone happened. Now, what that means is if the vote to postpone fails, my understanding is it automatically goes into committee and that question and answer time starts. And if they run out of questions and answers, it goes to a vote. And that's just how it has to be. That is the correct process. And that process has to be honored. It has to be respected. And so if this vote to delay the legislation failed and it went into question time and people ran out of questions or the government were able to use a procedural process to force a vote, and that vote happened without Adam Somyurekt in the chamber, the government were going to win and get their legislation through today. For obvious reasons, and we all know where Catherine stands, she's been very vocal about that. Catherine did not want that to happen. That is why she chose to side with the government and delay the legislation in order to try and make sure that we didn't end up in a situation where there was a vote happening today because the procedures required it, and yet Adam wasn't there and the government got what they wanted, all along. So you can argue about whether that was the right decision or not. People can talk about that till the cows come home. But what I do want to highlight is jumping to the idea that, she sold us out. Let's give people a bit more of the benefit of the doubt than that. And let's just accept that the realities on the ground for the person inside the chamber are very different to the realities on the ground for the people standing on the steps outside or the people watching on their screens from home. There are games that get played inside that building, procedural games as well as interpersonal games and deals, etc. Tactics that get used, many of them dirty, to try and get things done. And these people who are even the ones that are on our side have to be wise to those games and have to be very careful how they tread. And for people like you and I who aren't wise to those games, and I said at the outset, this is not an area that I've had to look into deeply before because I've not really been commentating on a piece of legislation that's hung in the balance quite the way that this one does. So I've been a bit naive up until now as well. But we, in my opinion, when you see someone like David Limbrick, Tim Quilty, Catherine Cumming, there's a few others coming good as well. Bernie Finn has started to come good. A couple of others as well. When you see these people doing things that you don't understand yet, just give them the benefit of the doubt, just for a second. Like, at least wait until you've heard their reasoning for why they may have made the decision that they made. You're free to disagree with them, of course, it's a free country, but at least hear their version of events and their reasoning before you assume that they're doing something nefarious. Now, Catherine has since published some things saying that she wants the bill to be negotiated and she wants it to be modified, which I find a little bit unsatisfactory. I personally don't want to see this bill modified. I want to see it fail. And I want to see it fail in such a way that they don't manage to get anything up before December 15th. And therefore, on December 16th, the emergency powers end. And then we get to enjoy Christmas and New Year without any of this stuff hanging over our head. And we can start the fight again in the new year when Daniel Andrews, no doubt, will come back and try and get these powers for himself again. So am I thrilled with the outcome? No. Am I thrilled with Catherine Cummings' approach of saying, hey, let's talk about this bill, let's negotiate on it? No, I'm not. But at the same time, she has been vocal. She has been on our side. I don't think she's betrayed anybody today. And we just need to continue to keep the pressure on and continue to do what we've been doing. Let's not forget how much progress we've made in a very short space of time. Let's not forget how much progress we've made. Would Adam Somyurekt have come out and said what he has said and done what he has done if there hadn't been a single protest about this bill? If it was just passing its way through Parliament in peace, the way that most bills do? I can tell you almost certainly not. Without wanting to psychoanalyze the man, and I barely know him at all. Like, I've never met him personally. I only know him through what I've seen online. It struck me when I heard that he'd come forward that there was a certain amount of looking for redemption in him. He was doing this because he knew it was the right thing to do, and he had an obligation to do the right thing because he'd now been forced to admit through IBAC, etc., that he'd been involved in a lot of the wrong things. The thing that actually sprung to mind, and it's funny because I read the book more than 20 years ago, the thing that sprung to mind was A Tale of Two Cities, Charles Dickens. And there are two characters who are basically visually identical just by pure fluke. They're not related. They're basically identical. And one of them's a real scoundrel and one of them's very honorable. And the honorable one ends up, sentenced to death in revolutionary France. And the scoundrel has a battle with his conscience and ultimately comes in and visits him in prison and swaps with him and basically condemns himself to death and sets his honorable sort of visual twin free. And it's one of Dickens' more criticized books because a lot of literary critics have argued that he didn't set that up in the character well enough, that redemption, that desire for redemption, that willingness to actually die for that sense of redemption, wasn't well enough established in that character prior to that decision. We can argue about that. Who cares? But for whatever reason, I haven't read that book in 20 years, but that is what sprung to my mind as soon as I saw that Adam had come forward and tabled his vaccination papers. That book from 20 years ago popped into my head and I went, redemption. He's looking for redemption. Revenge and redemption are two different things, Jenny. I see your comment there. This is not revenge. This is redemption. They're two very different things. So I think that's why he's come forward. Why wasn't he in Parliament today? No idea. No idea. I can imagine that his reception would have been pretty frosty if he had come in, and whenever he does come in, it's going to be pretty frosty. That's going to be a really unpleasant day for him, and the government are going to make sure it feels as unpleasant as they possibly can for him. But I think he's looking for redemption, and I hope he has the courage to stick it out. But would he have done it if it weren't for the protest? Well, probably not. Because would he have that drive for that redemption if it wasn't so public? If it wasn't going to be seen and noticed by so many people? I'm not sure that he would. So I think in a very real sense, and of course I would say this, I've been involved in the protest movement, so of course I've got a vested interest in believing this, but I look at it and I conclude that this moment has arisen because of the protests, or at least was made far more likely because of the protests, the pressure, the size of the protests, the fact that the media have started to actually have to report a little bit more honestly on us. And we'll talk a bit more about that in a minute because there's some things that we need to clean up a little bit. But I think it was very much our activities, going back 20 months in the case of a small number of us, but going back in the last month in the case of a very large number of us. It was our activities that facilitated this moment. It was our numbers on the street that have changed the numbers inside Parliament House. And it's also made it much more difficult for the other crossbenchers to do a deal. So the first thing Daniel Andrews did, of course, when he got word that Somyurekt might be coming in, was he started reaching out to the crossbenchers. And I posted something that it was a segment from Neil Mitchell where he had a few of the crossbenchers on phone calls, and they'd all been reached out to. And of course, that all basically told the government where to go because they've been treated like dirt by the government up until now. But it would be much more tempting for them to do a deal and become relevant. And all of a sudden, I can get my little pet legislation through in return for supporting that legislation. That would be a much more tempting proposition if there weren't 70,000 people out the front of Parliament House protesting against the passage of the bill. It is the best of times and it is the worst of times, Brian. Quite correct. I think it's one of those times that brings out the best in some people, and we're seeing that on the streets of Melbourne now. Some people are absolutely rising to this, and it's a beautiful thing to see. So that's where we got to today. Adam didn't show up. It has been said, as I've seen some comments here, he needed security apparently, and may not have had that available to him in time for him to enter the chamber. I don't know. I don't know the ins and outs of what goes on in his mind or what he feels that he needs. But I've no doubt that that things are being put in place so that he can come into the chamber in 2 weeks' time and do what he said that he would do. If you read his op-ed today, he's pretty much nailed his thesis to the door of the Catholic Church, right? There's kind of no coming back from what he said today. He can't turn around now and play nice with them and cut some sort of a deal. I don't see that happening from where he is. So that brings us to where the bill is. The bill is adjourned for 2 weeks. It's been postponed. It will get voted on in the next sitting week of Parliament, which my understanding is 2 weeks, so a week and a half from now, starting on the Tuesday. And that is the last one before the pandemic powers expire at the end of December 15th. So if they can't make something happen in the next sitting week of Parliament, which they could, let's be clear, they could very much make something happen. But if they fail to make something happen in that week of Parliament, then we're left with a situation where the pandemic powers, as they are under the emergency declaration, expire, and there's nothing to replace them. And that means that all of the things that they have done under these powers, all of the chose directives, all of the restrictions on who can shop and who can't, and density limits and all that stuff just expires, because all of that was done under the emergency declaration. And if that legislation expires, so do all of those rules and regulations. So it comes down to what happens in 2 weeks' time. December 2nd, I think. Comes down to then. So what do we do? Well, let's talk first about what Daniel Andrews is going to do. He needs this legislation. If this legislation fails, and then he tries again in the new year to get something up, and that also fails, he is wide open to a leadership challenge within his own party at that point in time. Okay, Craig has made a good point. A premier can recall Parliament. That's true. I think 2 days' notice they can bring them in to vote on legislation. So that is true. In theory, it could happen at any time all the way up until December 16th. But I think if we can maneuver in such a way that it's not viable for him to make it happen in 2 weeks' time, and we keep that pressure on, then I think it will remain unviable for him all the way through. So Daniel Andrews needs another crossbencher. So let me talk about what a crossbench is for a second. I did tell you I was going to go through some pretty basic stuff, so my apologies if this is stuff you're already all over. There's a few people that would probably benefit from this. So, like I said before, the lower house determines who the government is. So, by default, the government has a majority in the lower house. So, this legislation passed the lower house. No problem. Of course, it did. It came from the government. They have the numbers. That's what makes them the government. Fair play. It goes into the upper house. Now, the way people are elected into the upper house is deliberately different to how they're elected into the lower house. And that was done by the people who designed our constitution and our system. That was done very deliberately. It was to try and make sure that it would be very rare for a government to have an automatic majority in both houses. That was actually something that they were trying to avoid, so that legislation would have to be analyzed, scrutinized. Deals would have to be done, not in a negative sense, but in the sense of someone saying, I'm not going to vote for this until you improve these things about this piece of legislation. And that would improve the quality of the legislation coming through, at least in theory. We can argue about whether that's working in practice. That was the idea. So how people get elected into the upper house is different, and therefore the result is different in the upper house. What we have in the upper house at the moment is the Labor Party with the Greens, the Labor Party do not have an outright majority like they do in the lower house. They need some support from some other MPs. The Liberal Party, who are currently the opposition, don't have a majority either. In fact, they're relatively small in the historical scheme of things. So there are, I believe, off the top of my head, 11 crossbenches, or is it 14? And they need 3. So there's 11 left, or are there 8 left? I don't remember. I've got too much stuff in my head. But there are a certain number of crossbenches right now, and the government need 3 of them to pass any legislation to get it through the upper house so that it actually becomes law. They've had 3 very reliable upper house members supporting them, the Greens member, the Animal Justice Party member, and the Reason Party member. 11, 12 with Somyurekt. Thank you, Rob. Yeah, so there's 11 crossbenches, and then Somyurekt was a Labor MP, got kicked out of the party through all this IBAC corruption stuff, and is now effectively another member of the crossbench. So good point. 12 with Somyurekt back. So up until Somyurekt came back, the government only needed 3, and they had them. They had these reliable, ultra-left-wing people that were happy to support the government in return for the government supporting their little pet projects and pet pieces of legislation. With Somyurekt back, they need a 4th. Now, if you go through the list, that's not particularly easy necessarily, because you don't necessarily have anyone who's automatically aligned with what the government is doing right now. When you add the protests on top of that, it gets even harder, because the public pressure and the public scrutiny that is going on right now in Victoria is unprecedented. We haven't seen this before. These MPs have never seen this before. No MPs in Victoria have seen this level of scrutiny going on from the public before. So it makes it even harder for a crossbencher to cross over to the government side and give them what they need to get this bill passed. Then, when you add Daniel Andrews' arrogance and the fact that he has treated all of the crossbenchers except for his pet 3 like absolute dirt, and I'll explain what I mean by that in a moment, he has treated them so poorly that now they have a personal reason to want to see him crash and burn, which I think is just beautiful. It's karma in its most beautiful form. So, how did he treat them like dirt? Well, this permanent pandemic powers bill that they're arguing over right now has been around since March. This is when we know from documents that got leaked, it was first being talked about. No one got to see it. Even many members of the government didn't get to see it, because it was just presumed that they were going to vote for it. They would do as they were told. They needed 3 crossbenchers. They didn't talk to all the crossbenchers. They just talked to their pet 3, and they kept everybody else in the dark. That's not how our democratic system is supposed to work. Then, when they did give the rest of the crossbench a briefing on the legislation, someone noticed that not all of the crossbenchers were there in that Zoom briefing. There were a few missing. 3, in fact. Which 3? The pet 3. They were at that very moment in another briefing where they were being told the real details and being worked with, where the crossbenchers sitting in this so-called briefing were basically just being given nothing. That pisses people off when you treat them like that. It especially pisses off an elected member of parliament whose job is to represent their constituents, and now they can't even see the legislation that they're supposedly going to be, expected to vote on. So when you add the fact that none of the crossbenchers are automatically closely ideologically aligned. None of the remaining, obviously, excluding the three. None of the others are deeply ideologically aligned. There's a huge amount of public scrutiny and pressure. And Daniel Andrews has behaved very poorly and put them offside at a personal level. It's now going to be a very difficult challenge for him to bring one of those crossbenchers over. It's not to say it's impossible. Dirty deals get done all the time. We can't take it for granted. But Daniel Andrews has a challenge ahead of him. But that's what he's going to be working on. He's going to spend the next week and a couple of days working on trying to bring over one more of these crossbenchers. So if that's what he's doing, what do we do? Well, sorry, let me add a few more things. There's two main things in Daniel Andrews' toolbox to try and win the support of another crossbencher. One, and one that he won't want to do, is to make concessions in the legislation itself, to make the legislation more palatable. Now, he may be willing to do some things. He may be willing to trade off some things. And in fact, there's a very real likelihood that he included some things in the legislation that were particularly extreme for the purpose of trading them away if he had to, right? It's a common debating tactic, negotiating tactic. If you're happy to pay this price, you don't offer that price. You offer this price, and you make them argue you all the way up to that price that you were always happy to pay in the first place. He demands this much power and makes everyone argue him down to an amount of power that he was more than happy with to begin with. So there's almost certainly that. This bill is probably not as extreme as what he actually wants. Sorry, is more extreme than what he actually wants, simply so that he's got a few things to give away in negotiations to try and win somebody over. So that's tactic number one. But there is a very real limit on how far he's going to be willing to go, because he wants these powers. He doesn't need these powers in order to manage a pandemic. He wants these powers because he believes that that's his role in society. He is a genuine narcissist, in my opinion, and quite possibly a psychopath, in my opinion. And again, I don't use words as weapons. I say what I mean. Read and understand what a psychopath is, and compare that to what he does and how he's behaved. And I think he may be a genuine psychopath, in my opinion. So there is going to be a point where he's traded away too much. And he's not willing to trade away anymore because he looks at it and goes, no, this isn't as much as I deserve. I deserve these powers. I deserve to have that much control over people's lives because I can control your life and live your life better than you can. I think he genuinely believes that. So yes, there'll be some things that he can trade away, but there will be a limit to that. So the other tool in his toolbox is to offer to these crossbenchers to support legislation that they want passed. So this is where guys like Andy Medic, Animal Justice, and the Greens, etc., they often will do deals with Labor because ideologically they're relatively closely aligned. And so Andy Medic might get, and I'm spitballing here, I'm not saying that this has happened, but he might get something, a strengthening of certain animal protection laws, or the Greens might get a ban on a certain type of logging, or whatever it may be, something that the Labor Party knows isn't particularly popular. And again, just to repeat, I'm not saying those things have happened. I'm spitballing examples of the sorts of things that might be on the table where a crossbencher might go to the government and say, hey, listen, you need someone to support this legislation. I'll do it for you, but you've got to do this for me. And these sorts of deals do get done all the time. That is literally just the continuous daily business of politicians whenever there's a minority government in the lower house, or a minority senate, or a minority upper house. These deals are getting done all the time. So those are his weapons, trading off some of the powers, adding maybe a little bit more pretend oversight. Because remember, there's oversight. There's two different bodies that have oversight in the Permanent Pandemic Powers Bill. Yeah, but there's no real oversight. They have no teeth. So he might offer to add some more pretend oversight. He might wind back a few of the more extreme powers. He might reduce the 2 years in prison to 1 year in prison. Oh, I'm being so benevolent. I can only arbitrarily imprison people for 1 year at a time. These are the sorts of games that he will play. And then in addition to that, offering to give these MPs things that they can take back to their constituents and say, hey, I won this for you. You need to vote for me again. You voted for me last time. Vote for me again because I got this for you, which is very attractive to particularly minor party crossbenchers whose re-election is very much not assured and is all but guaranteed to not succeed. They're all but guaranteed to be a one-term minority upper house member. And so being able to take something back to the voters and say, look what I got for you. Vote for me again is a really attractive thing. So that's what he's going to be doing. And what we need to be doing in response is making sure that these crossbenchers, all of them, understand how damaging it would be to their re-election prospects if they were to turncoat and support this legislation in any form. Right? I'm not interested in seeing this negotiated and some of the powers reduced and then it gets passed. No, this bill at its very foundation is completely undemocratic because it concentrates power in the way that I discussed before. And if you've only joined more recently, you need to go back and watch the whole thing. What's wrong with this bill? It's the concentration of power. It flies in the face of everything that our system is supposed to be about. I talked about that earlier. So this bill is wrong from its very foundation and it needs to be rejected, not renegotiated. So how do we get these crossbench MPs to hold the line? Well, a lot more of what we've already been doing and less of the mistakes that we've been making. So number one, we need to keep raising a lot of noise and we need to stay interested. We need to stay engaged. There might be a week's lull now, right? As we go, there's no longer a sitting week. There won't be more of the drama, Adam Somyurekt, etc. That'll all die away for a week. We've got to make sure that the public stay engaged. That means, when you see a post from Voice for Victoria, when you see something from me, from Rukshan, from Avi, from any of the myriad of people that are pushing information out there, share it, comment on it. Make sure that any of these crossbenchers that bothers to go and look and see, are people still engaged in this? They see, people are still very much engaged. They are still very much paying attention. And if I screw up, they are going to notice. Excuse me. The second thing we absolutely have to do is turn up in massive numbers on Saturday. Now, like I said, I got silenced for a while by my bail conditions. I have sought clarification from the police around my bail conditions. They have assured me that I can show up on Saturday, and I've arranged with the organisers to speak on Saturday. So I will be there and I will be speaking. My understanding is, based on the way my bail conditions are written, is that if I'm allowed to show up, then I'm also allowed to encourage others to show up. So that's what I'm doing. You need to get there. If the police come for me for whatever reason, then I'll cross that hurdle when I get to it. But I am acting in good faith on the advice that I have received from the police, and I will be there, I will be speaking, and we all need to get there. So why? What difference does it make? I've had so many people over literally now 20 months. Oh, what difference is the protest making? You've been protesting for months, haven't changed a thing. I'll tell you what we've changed. We've gone from, I've gone from having a cigar to not having a cigar. I put it down. Oh, goodness. How in the world did that end up on the floor behind me? I've got a poltergeist, not a cigar. That was weird. It's not gone out. Okay. I must have knocked it off somehow. Just not realized. Okay. We need to be, what we've achieved is we've gone from having 70 people. April 25th, 2020, I spoke at the very first anti-lockdown rally. We had about 70 people. Last Saturday, we had about 70,000. That's what we've achieved, right? 70 people can be ignored. 70,000 can't. 70 people would not have got Adam Somyurekt to do what he's done. 70,000 was enough, right? That's what we've achieved. This weekend, I think, is going to be the biggest one so far. This weekend is going to be absolutely massive. And I hope that this weekend we can comfortably, and maybe we already did break the 100K. I don't know. It's very hard to estimate these things, but hopefully by the time we see the crowd estimates from this coming weekend, that it is well over 100,000 people. And I'll talk about the logistics of that rally in just a minute. So by keeping engaged on social media and by showing up to this rally, we can keep these crossbenchers on notice that we are paying attention. And if they sell us out, they are definitely not getting re-elected. Because if there's 100,000 people at a protest, there's 1 million people who wanted to be at the protest but didn't come for whatever reason. And in amongst those 1 million people, there's going to be a bunch of people that they need to vote for them. And now there's no chance that they will. So the sheer size of the crowd matters. This is a numbers game. I've been saying this since the beginning. This is a numbers game. We didn't have the numbers at any point in 2020. We had one or two protests where we had big enough numbers that the police had to kind of step back, and that was nice. But by and large, we didn't even have that. The police were able to move in. This year, again, the first half of this year, the police kept on moving in, and it's only been in the last month that we've actually had the numbers to really make a difference. So we absolutely have to make this Saturday massive. It has to be the biggest one we've ever had. You need to be calling your friends. You need to be organizing carpooling. You need to be doing whatever needs to be done logistically to help your friends and contacts and family and whoever else join us there. That is crucial to this couple of weeks. We have to make sure that these crossbenchers know that we are watching. Okay. There's a couple of mistakes that have started to creep in, and I, on a slow chat, I don't know, 6 months ago or so, I urged everyone, or maybe a bit less, maybe 4 months, I urged everyone to clean up the messaging. The messaging was messy. You may remember that along the way, we've had 5G stuff, we've had various sort of conspiracy theories, we've had people wanting to bring in other issues that may in their own right be very valid, but are not appropriate and really muddy the message. What's happened recently, the message is really good. The message is really strong and clear. But what's happened recently is we've had some people overstepping the mark in some really ugly ways. People particularly threatening violence. It is just a gift to Daniel Andrews to just be able to play the victim. Right now, I get it. I do get where you're coming. You shouldn't do it, but I do get where you're coming from. And we've spent 20 months watching our families get hurt at a very personal level by Daniel Andrews and by his stooges. And now that the tables are turning and now that we're starting to feel like we've got power, there's a desire to want to try and get even. There's a desire to tell him that you're going to hurt him the way that he's hurt your family. No. Just put a lid on it. Let's win this fight and let's watch him suffer the consequences. I hope to see him in prison. There's enough that's gone on that I hope to see him in prison someday. But to be making threats is wrong in the first place. To be making threats now is a massive tactical mistake, in addition to just simply being flat out wrong. All right. You shouldn't be doing it in the first place. Doing it now, it sets us back in a big way. The media sees on it. The politicians sees on it. It does not help anyone. People have asked me my thoughts on the gallows thing. I don't think it's necessarily in good taste. I don't hate it at the same time. The media definitely did do a big beat up about it. I don't hate it. Probably, sticking the little blow up Daniel Andrews into it and that sort of stuff, probably at that point is probably crossing the line. But I do understand the message. I do understand what people are sort of trying to convey. And it's not a threat directly in its own right, although sticking that little Daniel Andrews doll into it, again, that's probably somewhere around about where the line is. That's where I probably wouldn't have gone. But we don't actually need it, right? We don't need those things. I'm not going to say that he did the wrong thing to bring it. That would just be my opinion anyway. But I am going to say we don't need it, right? What we need are signs and chants and boots on the ground. That's what we need. And we're getting those. So let's not give easy attack angles to the media. Let's not give people who might be sitting on the fence still a reason to stay away and to go, oh, no, those are a bunch of nut jobs, etc. I am going to make my own counterpoint, though. And that is, please don't stay away just because of the media attacks, right? Don't choose to stay home because you don't want to be associated with, there's a couple of crazies there, I don't really want to be associated with them. No. Do not give the media that power. Do not give the media the power to make you stay home because they might say something mean about you or accuse you of being something that you're not. All right. That is giving them power they do not deserve. When I attended the very first rally, April 25th, 2020, like I said, there were 70 people there. And there were some people there that had some ideas that I don't necessarily agree with. And I copped a lot of abuse, a lot of hate. The biggest avalanche of hate that I've ever personally had was in the days immediately following that rally. And in amongst it were a whole lot of people getting in there saying, Topher, I used to respect you. I watched all your stuff on the water situation, blah, blah, blah. You've gone off the deep end. You've thrown in your lot with these kooks and crazies. You've destroyed your reputation. You're never going to recover. Da, 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 da. Okay. That's your opinion. Good for you. Then I went along to one of the shrine rallies. How could you desecrate the shrine? Okay, that's your opinion. You're never going to recover. You've got no credibility. You're never going to have any credibility. No one's ever going to follow you again. You're a has-been now. Okay, that's your opinion. Then I was at rallies where violence broke out and people did stuff to the cops they shouldn't have done. Oh, you're involved in violence. You're inciting violence. You're responsible for this. I've got members of my own family trying to tell me that I'm responsible for bottles being thrown and stuff like that. Okay, that's your opinion. But I couldn't help but notice that what was happening in reality was the opposite of what they were predicting, right? The movement was actually growing, far more slowly than it should have, but it was growing. That I wasn't a has-been. Actually, my voice and my influence was increasing through all of this. And that with all of the media attacks on us, all of the name calling, all of the lies that they told, they didn't win. We did. And 20 months later, here we are, still kicking, stronger than ever. And now what's been happening on the streets is beginning to unfold and beginning to influence what happens inside Spring Street. I tell you that to say this. The media are going to lie about you no matter what you do. You know what? If the Gallows hadn't been there, they would have found something else. They would have found someone with a sign that said something. They would have interviewed a bunch of people till they found one person who said the thing that they could run with on the nightly news, right? They were going to keep on looking until they found something to criticize. Now, that's not a reason for us to give them a free kick. It's not a reason for us to give them an easy angle to attack us. But at the same time, the fact that they attack us is ultimately meaningless because they're going to keep looking until they find something. So why fear that? Why just accept in advance they're going to lie about you? Accept in advance they're going to smear you and call you names. Accept that that's the reality and accept that that's not the end of the world, that we are winning this fight. And if we cower at home because we are afraid of being called names, you know, like sticks and stones will break my bones, but names will never hurt me. If you're cowering in fear because the media might lie about you as, you know, by proxy because you were in a crowd, you're probably not cut out for this fight, right? Stay at home and live off the coattails of those of us that are actually willing to get out there and do the hard work. So those are the two different sides to that issue. Number one, don't give them a free kick. Why are we giving them easy attack angles? Number two, they're going to attack us anyway. Even if we don't give them easy attack angles, they're going to attack us anyway. So the fact that they're attacking us should not put you off, right? If someone is determined to hate you, no matter what you do or what you say, the logical response is to put no effort into changing their mind, because they're not going to change their mind. And every piece of effort you put into changing their mind is wasted effort that could have been spent elsewhere. These people are going to lie about you and call you names. Accept it. Move on and get there. Right? Okay, enough on that. A few things to be aware of about this Saturday. There's some interesting stuff going on. There is supposedly an Antifa counter protest being organized. They're going to be meeting up at the top end of Russell Street near that the 888 like 40-hour work week statue that they've got at the top end of Russell Street there, which, not coincidentally, is very close to the Flagstaff Gardens, which is our ultimate destination. So on Saturday, the plan is 12 o'clock, we meet out the front of Parliament. Once we have a nice mass, we're actually going to march to Flagstaff Gardens. Now, you might be thinking, well, hang on, isn't Parliament where we should be? Well, the politicians won't be there, okay, tomorrow, on Saturday, sorry. And one of the problems with that location when you get a big crowd is people can't hear the speeches. If you're down the back of the crowd somewhere on Burke Street, there is no way known you're going to hear what anyone's saying up the front. So what we've got is a situation where the organisers have organised a nice big sound system. It's being set up, of course, in cooperation with the police now, which is nice. And so all going well, we're going to have a nice big sound system there in the Flagstaff Gardens where hopefully, because people can kind of gather in a ball rather than being in a street, people can all gather in close enough and the sound system is going to be powerful enough so that everyone can actually hear and participate and be a part of the speeches and the responses. And there's a certain magic in that, especially when you've got 100,000 people. It's going to be a really, really good moment. But they have decided to organize their counter protest one city block away from where we are intending to end up. Now, my hope is that they don't get big numbers, okay? Antifa have much less influence than they like to believe. They like to believe that we're a couple of extreme right-wingers, some small tragic bunch of whatever. But the reality is we're going to have 100,000 people, and they're not, right? Now, hopefully what that means is that they keep their distance and they don't cause any trouble. But unfortunately, this is an organization that has a long history of deliberately causing trouble, knowing that the media are going to be on their side, right? Knowing that the media is going to skew it in their favor. So this is where we have to be really, really smart. Film everything, right? Don't everyone live stream because there's only so much telephone bandwidth, and we need Rukshan's stream to be able to get out to the world. I'll be streaming as well. We need the people with big audiences to be live streaming, but we need everyone to be ready to record what happens with you and your interactions, but also others around you if they get approached by someone who tries to cause trouble. That is essential evidence in court later on. If an agent provocateur or if an Antifa person or someone like that comes in and tries to cause trouble, we need that video record and we need that evidence to be able to show that they are the ones who started the trouble. Regardless of what the media may report, we can then show online and in court, if necessary, the reality of what happened on the ground. So number one, I should say before record everything, don't start anything. You know what? People are allowed to be wrong. People are allowed to think that you are some right-wing nut job. This is a free country and they are allowed to believe that about you. So don't try and change their mind, right? Why start something? Why? These are people that for the most part are beyond reaching. Why engage with them? Why discuss anything with them when their minds are completely made up and all they're going to want to do is show off in front of their mates? And for them, showing off means starting trouble, right? So you need to come in, Black Books, the TV show, the British TV comedy series, Black Books. I can't remember the actor's name. He swallowed the little book of calm. Or no, did he swallow it? Yeah, he swallowed the little book of calm and he became this sort of Zen-like, always calm person. We all kind of need to come along with that kind of Zen, right? That no matter what someone says or does or tries to start, we respond with good grace and de-escalation and stay together with others, right? Because it's a lot harder for them to pick on you and start something when there's a bunch of you who are all de-escalating and all acting peacefully. It's much more difficult. So try Dylan Moran. Thank you. It was I know Dylan Moran was the main character. Who was the character that swallowed the book? Bill Bailey. That's the one. Bill Bailey swallowed the little book of calm. So don't allow yourself to get isolated. Be ready to record yourself or others and be ready to support each other in completely non-violent, de-escalationary ways. Numbers are your best defense and staying with large groups is your best way to deal with that. I've spoken to the organizers and made sure that they're aware of the counter-protest and that they are talking to the police about the counter-protest. And hopefully the police will simply ensure that they don't cause any trouble in the first place. That would be my hope. But we'll just have to wait and see. Okay, so be aware of the counter-protest. Don't start anything, but be ready to film just in case they do. We will need that evidence. Okay. Do be aware of the potential for agent provocateur type incidents. And don't create an atmosphere in which they can be successful. And I'll break that down in a second. But first things first, agent provocateurs are not nearly as common as some people seem to believe. But they are a thing. They are a thing. The environment in which agent provocateurs are able to be effective are in environments where there is already verbal conflict. If you've got a line screaming at a bunch of police officers and someone runs up to the front of the line and throws a half brick at a police officer and then disappears back into the crowd, they fit right in. And the media can grab that moment and go, see, what a violent, senseless mob, right? But if you're not actually starting a verbal confrontation in the first place, how does some guy just run up the front and throw a brick and then get characterized and we all get lumped in with him? No, he stands out like a sore thumb. He can't do that because the environment hasn't been created in which he can blend in and look like he's still a part of the crowd, right? So we need to make sure that we don't create an environment in which agent provocateurs, if they're there, okay, and like I said, they're not nearly as common as some people seem to think they are, but they're a thing. We need to create an environment in which they can't operate. They can't risk doing their thing, whatever their thing was going to be, because they're just going to be too obvious. Now, the atmosphere that's been created at the protest in the last couple of weekends is spot on. All right, absolutely spot on. Some of what we saw during the week with the people camped out in front of Parliament House was starting to get a little bit borderline in terms of that atmosphere and in terms of creating that opportunity. So we just need to make sure that the atmosphere we all create and the atmosphere that we encourage from others around us is not one in which they're going to be able to operate and in which they're going to be able to blend in. Keep your heads, record everything. Never forget that you're being recorded as well. Everything you do and everything you say, you have to assume that someone got that on camera, someone got that on their microphone. Never forget that you're being recorded. Always be the bigger man, right? Always be the one who is willing to de-escalate, who's willing to have someone insult you and you just go, okay, mate, have a nice day, right? Always be the bigger man all the time. We are winning. This is the really exciting thing. We are absolutely winning. We've seen crowd sizes that this state hasn't seen at protests in a very, very long time. We're seeing an engagement and an interest in the political process that this state hasn't seen in a very long time. And as of Tuesday, we are really beginning to see that our actions are starting to influence what happens inside Parliament House, right? We've crossed that threshold. We're no longer outside Parliament House yelling slogans. We are now inside Parliament House, and we are inside the heads of every single crossbencher who's going to be being approached and pressured by the government to flip. This whole week, it's going to be relentless for them. And we need to make sure that we're inside their heads and that they have always in the back of their mind that if they turn their backs on us, there is zero chance of them ever getting re-elected. Okay. Some big news. I'm actually bringing my film crew with me for the documentary. We're going to be filming a bunch of stuff for the documentary, which is super exciting. It's the first time I will have been to any of these protests other than just myself. And yeah, it's going to be really fun. It's going to be a really interesting day. I am going to be making a speech, and that's going to be fun. I think you're going to like it. Yeah, I've been working on it for about a week now. So ever since I got the word from the police that I would be okay. Well, not a week, it's less than that, but been working on it for a couple of days now. And I'll keep working on it all the way up until I stand up there and they hand me the microphone. But I think you're going to like it. I think it's going to be something that's going to leave a mark, and you'll remember it for quite a long time, I think. I would love, if you've got t-shirts, I would love for you to come say hi. That would be a real thrill for me. I've seen these photographs. I mean, it's been really annoying for me not being able to go to the protests for the last, month or whatever since my arrest, because it's been amazing to watch. And all of a sudden the violence disappeared, and I'm like, I want to be there. The crowds are massive. The atmosphere is electric. And I'm seeing photographs of people wearing my t-shirts, and I can't be there to shake their hand and give them a hug and say hi. Someone's just asked, am I speaking at Parliament or at the park? All the speeches are going to be at the park, Nathan, because that's where the sound system is. And that's where people will be able to hear us better, because you'll be able to gather in a big ball rather than being stuck down the streets. If you are too far away to hear, jump on Rukshan's live stream, my live stream, anyone else's live stream, and just so you can hear it from your phone, or bring a little sound system that can tune in, and that way you can actually hear it and maybe play it for the people around you as well. Yes, so if you've got a t-shirt, I'd love to shake your hand and say thank you. And hey, I'd love to meet you anyway, t-shirt or not. I'd just love to say hi. One other thing that I forgot to mention already is the hoodies. The hoodies have finally just gone up on the website tonight. So if you would rather a hoodie rather than a t-shirt, then they are now available. And speaking of which, I should actually put in the URL. Unfortunately, these, if you order tonight, it won't arrive in time for the protest because that's obviously only 2 days away. But look, we've probably got another month of protests ahead of us. This is probably going to be ongoing all the way up until the emergency powers expire on the 15th of December. And of course, if they push something through, then it's going to go on for longer than that. So let me just type in, did I say Flagstaff Gardens? I meant, Flagstaff Gardens. Yeah. I'll just put the URL in here. AussieBotStudio.com/Topher Field. Okay, so that should just drop into your comment feed now. That you can have a look at that. Have a look at the shirts. Good people buy hoodies. It said that an error occurred, and I wasn't able to put that in. Oh, that's odd. Let me just try that again. Studio.com/Topher Field. Wonder why that. Okay, so it's dropped in. Flagstaff Gardens. There it is. It worked that time. So AussieBot Studio /Topher Field. It's an Australian company that does all the printing for me. They bring the t-shirts in from overseas and they do all the printing. They're in regional Victoria. And when I found them, I was very happy to give them my business and to do all my t-shirts through them. They take care of all of the dispatching, quality control, etc. We've had one person that's had an issue with a t-shirt and they happily took it back. They actually sent out a replacement with a postage paid return bag and they just stuck the old bag, the faulty t-shirt into that bag and sent it back. So there's no issues there. They're an Australian company, really good service from them. So Brad at AussieBot, thank you very much for what you do. Anything else that I need to cover before I just go through some comments and some questions? Not Treasury, Nikki. It's Flagstaff. So we're marching. I think we're going to march north along Spring Street, and then along not Alexandra Parade. What's that one called? Victoria Parade to the Flagstaff Gardens. Yeah. Okay. So I think let me just double check all my notes. Make sure I've gone through everything. Yep. Okay. Good. So what do I think of today's comments from the PM? It's a continuation of his trend for flip-flopping, right? GT, yes, we are starting at Parliament House on Spring Street at 12 p.m. midday on Saturday. We will then, probably about past or something, we will then march to Flagstaff Gardens. Scotty from marketing has tried to have a foot in each camp all the way through this. And I find his so-called leadership so incredibly disappointing. It's just been such a disappointment all the way through this. On the one hand, he wants to say, oh, no, we don't have the power to mandate vaccinations. But then he loves to brag about the fact that he mandated no jab, no play. And that's how he would like to handle COVID. But, oh, no, but I can't do that. And so then he puts pressure on the states. And the states look at it and go, this is a hot potato that's going to lead to massive lawsuits. So they don't do it. They put the onus onto the business owners and the employers. And everyone's playing hot potato with this and trying to push it onto the next person. So ScoMo needs to find his moral compass because he's lost it. He's lost his moral compass. I'm not in a position to judge another man's faith. That's something that only God can do. But we are instructed in Scripture that you will know them by their fruits. And as I look at the legislation that Scott Morrison has supported over his career, and as I look at how he has handled this particular crisis and his attitude towards human rights through this crisis, looking at his fruits, I'm not liking what I see. The reality is, though, all politicians have their finger to the wind to see which way the wind is blowing. And as our crowds get bigger, the wind that we generate gets stronger. Other states become bolder and their protests become bigger because they look at us and say, if they can be doing that down in Melbourne, then we can be doing that where we are too. So ultimately, what Scott Morrison says this week is kind of irrelevant. We need to keep the pressure on. We are the solution. right? And we're seeing that playing out right now in Victoria, where for the last 20 months, I've had people saying to me, oh, what are you achieving with the protests? Well, right now, we are directly influencing what goes on inside the Victorian Parliament House. And as this movement grows, we will be directly influencing what goes on inside the Canberra Parliament House. So the solution is that we need to keep doing what we've been doing for the last 20 months and build on the momentum that we've got. Okay. I'm looking for the next question. So if you've got a question, stick it in. Don't back off, says Sean Wallace. 100%. 100%. I won't go so far as to say we've got them on the ropes, but we've gone from being the underdog to turning it into a fair fight. That's what we've achieved. Sorry, yes, I did see this question before and I forgot about it. Who else is speaking? Honestly, I actually don't know. I'm buried in the documentary and I pop my head up from time to time to see what else is happening in the rest of the world. And I'm just back into the documentary. I'm not an organizer of any of the protests. So I'm sorry. I would have answered the question earlier if I actually knew, but I honestly, I don't. However, I think you can be pretty well assured that it's going to be some pretty good people. Can I pick one up from yours? Oh, sorry, Marcus has sent me a private message asking to pick up a hoodie from my place. I've only got one, Marcus. The other thing I should mention about the hoodies is I got an extra large and it's got a lot of room. I wear extra large because I am extra large. The sizes are pretty generous, so just keep that in mind as you're ordering for yourself. Yeah, just keep that in mind because yeah, they are quite generous. You'll be able to wear other clothes underneath, no problem. And if anything, if you're borderline in between two sizes, order the size down. Okay. Another senator has given the ultimatum to ScoMo. I believe there's 3 now that in the federal, so the federal Senate, the federal upper house have now given ultimatums and basically said that they're not going to keep supporting the government until they do something about all this stuff. So yeah, that's exciting. And again, this is what happens when public pressure forces politicians to start to actually honor their morals. There are a lot of politicians that have a problem with what's going on, but they don't want to go and do something and end their career and go too far against public opinion, right? What we're showing them is where public opinion lies, and they get bolder as a result. Is it worth emailing the Crossbench still? 100%, Donna. Absolutely. And in fact, if you haven't done it yet, let me grab that comment. There we go. If you haven't emailed yet, and even if you have, right, email the Crossbench senators. All their contact details, their office emails, etc., are all public. All right, so you can find out who they are, find out who the Crossbench are, send them emails. Be polite. Don't use a form letter. Actually take the time and the effort to write an email. Be polite. Keep it short, and ask them to do the right thing and to not extend these powers anymore. When I say keep it short, take the time to tell them about some of the impact on you, but in a brief way, right? I try to read everything that I get sent, and I get sent a lot less than a senator does, right? But the honest truth is when I open up an email or something and I just see a wall of text, I skim. Okay, I get the general gist of it. And as a general rule, and for the most part, I don't take the time to reply to those people because I don't have the time to even read the entire thing, right? And I don't, like, that sounds terrible, so I apologize, but it's a reality. I'm trying to finish a doco. I've got a family that needs my time as well. I'm trying to stay sane, do things like this from time to time, and I'm getting in the order of 150 to 200 emails and messages a day, and senators are getting even more. So keep that in mind as you email the senators, these crossbench senators. Be polite, be concise, be personal. Tell them a personal story. Tell them about the personal impact on you. But do it in a way that's really brief and really concise so that the person that opens that, because it's not the senator, it'll be their receptionist, the person that opens it reads the whole thing, okay? And then we'll pass that on to the senator themselves. How do we dissolve the Daniels government and restore the rule of law? Well, Justin, this is one of the mistakes that I think was made in the design of our system. I think our system's pretty good, but it's not perfect. The idea in our system is that we have this person called a governor who, at least in theory, works on behalf of the Crown. And their job is to give royal assent to legislation, and they have the power to dismiss the government if the government gets too far out of line. The problem in practice is that this is a role that's supposed to be appointed by the Crown, but in practice, this is a role that is given to one of the Prime Minister's best mates or the Premier's best mates, depending on state or federal. And they put that person forward to the Crown, and the Crown just rubber stamps it and says, okay, they can be the governor, right? We'll take your recommendation. And what that means is you've got a situation where the person who's supposed to be holding the Prime Minister or the Premier accountable is one of their best mates and has been given a cushy, high-paying job where they live in a cool house and get to go to lots of important functions and schmooze. And they're not going to turn around and throw the government out on its ear. I mean, what happened with the Prime Minister who was dismissed? Oh, goodness, I must be tired than I thought. Help me out, guys. The Prime Minister that got dismissed. What was his name? Whitlam. Thank you, Veronica. Gough Whitlam got dismissed. There was a chain of events that happened there that caused that to happen that are pretty hard to repeat. It was a pretty extraordinary, exceptional set of circumstances that led to that. And we can't expect that to happen pretty much ever again. The governors are just too cozy. They are handpicked by the Premier or the Prime Minister, given a cushy, high-paying job, and they like it. They like being where they are. And if they dismiss the government, they lose their cushy job because there's no guarantee the government will appoint them to when they take the next government will appoint them when they take power. So one of the things that was meant to be one of the checks and balances has actually doesn't work in practice. It just doesn't work. We can't be expecting the Governor General to dismiss ScoMo. We can't be expecting the Governor of Victoria to dismiss the Andrews government. It's just not practical. One of the things that I would like to see happen would be for the governor to be directly elected or actually appointed by the Queen, actually appointed by the Crown. Send someone over from England, right? They actually have a very important job. So one, they can dismiss the government, yes. Two, they can actually choose not to give their assent to a law. The idea was that they ought to have the power that if they look at a piece of legislation and they go, no, this is not right. This isn't what is supposed to happen. Excuse me, in a democratic country, this isn't holding to the values of what this legal system or the governmental system is supposed to be, something like the permanent pandemic powers. They're supposed to be able to look at that and go, no, I'm not giving that my signature. But once again, if they're appointed by the government and they could lose their job if the government decides they want to replace them with somebody else, well, at that point, they don't do that job, right? They just rubber stamp every piece of legislation that gets put in front of them. So we've lost one of the really important checks and balances within our system. It's still there on paper, but in practice, it doesn't actually work that way. So I would love to see the governor's role actually brought more under the control of the Crown directly. I think most of the time it wouldn't make a difference, but in those moments where we need them, they are going to be much more likely to do what we need them to do and to act on our behalf if the government gets out of control. But anyway. Yeah. Kerr definitely suffered consequences, excuse me, for what he did. Look, deals or bribes are a reality of politics. The moment there is money or power involved in any conversation, the opportunity for corruption creeps in. The opportunity for, if I scratch your back, will you scratch mine, creeps in. That's a reality of our system that I don't think is going to change. It's in human nature. And the minute these people are elected MPs, they have power, and that power is currency, and they can trade that to get what they want. So we're not going to get rid of that anytime soon. The best thing we can do about that is start paying a lot more attention to politics. We are where we are because of our own complacency. Daniel Andrews is, on the one hand, he's the problem. On the other hand, he's actually the symptom of the bigger problem. And we are the bigger problem. We need to be a lot more engaged in politics. What's happening right now, and the awakening that's happening right now, is people realize that just because they ignore politics doesn't mean that politicians will ignore them. that awakening needs to continue. We can't all, let's say Daniel Andrews gets thrown out on his ear, whether it's at the election or maybe before in a leadership spill or whatever it may be, whatever the scenario is. If we all then just go say, okay, job done, back to business as usual, our future is pretty grim, because the conditions that allowed someone like Daniel Andrews to do what he's already done so far will still exist. We have to get active and stay active until those conditions no longer exist, until we've completely removed the opportunity for someone like a Daniel Andrews to ever do what he's done ever again. What is it? Sunlight is the best disinfectant. People looking, watching, scrutinizing what they are doing. We can't necessarily see the deals being done in the back room, but we can see the legislation that's being passed. We can see who votes for what. And it's us. We're the problem. And we need to be much more politically engaged from now on. I'm actually starting to have trouble keeping this lit for some reason. Talk about smart cities. I don't know much about smart cities, mate. So no comment. Okay, so I'm hearing a lot about this whole Daniel Andrews has been charged. He's been served papers, these sorts of things. I don't know a lot about that. I'd like to have a chat with the chap who's behind a lot of that, whose name escapes me right now. But I have a policy of trying not to comment or commentate on things that I don't really have my own head wrapped around very well. And that falls into that category. So I appreciate the question. And I'm getting a lot of questions, people sending me messages and things, often asking me about that. I don't actually know. I'm sorry. That's not an area that I've researched. It's not an area that I'm going to invest a lot of time in just at the minute, because that's a bigger battle. Brian Shaw, that's the guy. That's a bigger battle. And there are other people fighting that battle, and that's good. Okay, we all need to be fighting from the angles that we are coming from. This is the angle that I'm coming from. The angle that I'm coming from is getting people to understand what's going on, to get active and get engaged, because ultimately this is the long-term solution. Us being engaged is the long-term solution. After the SOE ends, will the unvaxxed have the same rights as the vaxxed? Yes, I believe they will. I believe that all of that discrimination is enabled under the SOE. Now, I stand to be corrected. I'm not a legal expert. I stand to be corrected on that, but it is my understanding that all of that stuff will become basically unenforceable. I don't even think it's enforceable now, to be honest, but they're treating it like it's enforceable under the emergency orders, and they will punish you if you step out of line. I believe it will not be possible for them to continue that charade if the SOE does actually end on December the 15th. So yes, my understanding is that if we can get through the next 4 weeks without any new laws being put into place to cover this, that by default, we go back to where we were in 2019. Yeah, Emma, they deliberately don't teach us in school how the Australian political system works. I don't know about deliberately or just negligently. They just don't think it's important. Leave that to the politicians. But it's certainly true that we don't get a good education on how this stuff works. And we certainly don't get an education on how important this stuff really can be. So I agree with you that we need a much better education. I am actually I've basically made up my mind. Once this documentary launches, I want to start a series of videos that's essentially Politics 101, that talks about the practical matters of how politics works. And like I said before, this is not an area that I'm well versed in. So I'm going to have to do a lot of research and probably do interviews with people in sort of slow chats that can really actually break it down and help me and everybody else to really wrap our minds around that. But an area where I can talk is around the areas of incentives and the bigger picture aspects of politics, political theory, and how that manifests into sort of daily life, etc. So I'm wanting to do quite a big series on that. That'll probably take up most of 2022 for those that really kind of want to get a grounding and understanding of the political system as it exists today. But I would say also the theory of freedom as it's been expressed by great minds over the centuries. There are some amazing books that have been written, many of which I haven't yet read. I've read some, but there's many that I haven't. And so by doing this series, I'd be forcing myself to actually go back and read the ones that I haven't read yet, and then be able to kind of break that down and share that with you. If that's something that you would value, can you let me know? Just throw a comment in and say, yep, I'd want to be in on that. I don't want to do it if that's not of interest, but if it's of interest, then I'd be happy to do it. It would be good for me to do. I would learn a lot, and in the process, hopefully be able to communicate a lot with you guys as well. Okay, lots of people saying yes. Okay, well, that's a lot of people saying yes. Along the lines of Topher's unpopular view, no, it'll probably be more along the lines of slow chats, to be honest. This is a lot easier to do than the unpopular view series. That was a lot of work. But yeah, probably interview based, of me just seeking out people who are who know their stuff and actually just interviewing them. I just saw a comment go past. I'm going to have to try and catch up with it because comments are coming thick and fast at the moment. Hi, Topher, from another cigar aficionado. Squeeze around the end of the cigar and give it a puff. You could have it blocked with too much moisture. So purging or bellowing, I've heard that called as well. So I do that. And no, the moisture's okay at the moment. I'm fairly careful. I don't have too much moisture build up yet, but that is a weakness of a Churchill being such a long cigar, is that you can end up with all the moisture from the combustion from the leaves that you've already burned can build up. But that's not what's happening here. But yes, you do obviously know your cigars. Well done. Adam Somyurekt for first interview. Yeah, look, me getting interviews is a challenge. There are some people who won't touch me with a 20-foot pole, or a 40-foot Czechoslovakian for that matter. Sorry, bad joke. And there are others that are more than happy to come on. So I just kind of have to reach out to people and ask and hope for the best and see what they say. I saw someone asked whether I smoke the pipe that I've got behind me. I have tried a few times, but that's its own technique. It is its own kind of thing, and I'm not great at it yet. I do pick it up from time to time and have another go, and I'm slowly getting better, but not really. So tell him they're dreaming is one of the trolls that comes through here from time to time. But his question is actually useful, so I'm going to answer it. Is RV 100% legit, Topher? Opinions, please. Legit in what sense? He is who he says he is, right? You can love him or hate him, but I don't think he's pretending. You know, I've not spent a lot of time with him. I did a photo shoot with him, and then I interviewed him for the documentary. And I've got to say, my interview with him was a lot of fun. I enjoyed that interview tremendously, and I laughed a lot more in that interview than I did in most of the others. If you've been watching the snippets that I've been releasing, the clips, you'll see that some of it is pretty heavy. But my time with Avi was actually a lot of fun. But what's really nice when you kind of sit with him in a more sort of social off-camera setting, he doesn't really change. He's that same guy. He's larger than life. He's over the top, very ready to laugh and very ready to laugh at himself. I think he's quite self-aware, which I find really nice. Like if he wasn't self-aware, if he actually thought that he was the shiz, I would find him really off-putting. But he knows how ridiculous he is. He's very self-aware in that sense, and he has fun with it, and he takes the piss out of himself. So me personally, is he legit in the sense that he is who he presents? Yeah, I think he is. I think he is who he presents. You decide if you like him or not, but he is who he presents. Joel Jamal, Turning Point Australia, is someone who I would like to interview. But again, I haven't sort of had the chance for a little while. James Bennett asks, am I Topher off camera though? I am pretty much what you see in the slow chats. Obviously, what you see in the more highly produced videos, well, that's a persona. The same as a TV news presenter is a persona. That's not how they talk normally. They're doing a job. When you see me in my videos about the water situation, the Murray-Darling Basin, etc., that is a scripted, rehearsed, presented version of me. When you see me in these slow chats, that's pretty much me. If you came to my house and we had a chat and a cigar and sat outside and had a cigar, it's pretty much the same. Yeah. Melissa says, "How am I debriefing after all of those interviews?" Yeah, it's been interesting, Melissa, and thank you for the question. I appreciate it. That was a heavy week. That was a heavy week, and it's come on the back of a lot of heavy months. And in the atmosphere of me being arrested and all of the sort of the anxiety that comes with that, I've got 2 kids, one of which is old enough to kind of understand what's going on, and trying to make sure that he doesn't end up with a really negative attitude towards police and so forth, is a challenge when I'm also telling him, don't answer the door. Why not? It might be the police. And so, Eddie, my wife, answers the door and I get the phone ready to go live. There's a lot of kind of anxiety that comes with doing what I do in the context of Daniel Andrews, Victoria. It wasn't like that before that, by the way. I've been commentating on politics for 12 years now. And yes, the federal police have a file on me. I know that because they've been in touch with me to talk about some things, but never in a threatening sense, more in the sense of I popped up on their radar because I was seen filming national assets, national security assets. In this case, it was power stations for my very first video. It was quite funny, actually. I got to where I wanted to be, set up the camera. This is my very first video on the desalination plant down here in Victoria 12 years ago now. I recorded, packed all my gear away, drove away. I was nowhere near the power station, right? They've got security fences quite a long way away from the power station for the protection of those assets. But obviously I must have been close enough to a camera or been seen by a camera or something, and they pulled up my number plate and I got a phone call on my mobile phone literally 10 minutes after I'd driven away, and it was the federal police. Just wanting to know, who I am and what I'm doing and blah, blah, blah. They've got a file on me, but it's never been in this context of being threatening, being intimidating. We're going to punish you for what you're doing. That's never popped up at all until Daniel Andrews and until I started speaking out against Daniel Andrews. I've lived in Victoria most of my life. I've been in Victoria the whole time that Daniel Andrews has been Premier. There was never a problem until I spoke up against Daniel Andrews. How am I debriefing? These. I am blessed with an incredibly supportive family. And I can say with confidence I married the right woman. She's amazing. And that makes it very easy for me in a very real sense. But I do have to take time out for myself from time to time. And you may recall there was a few months there where I stepped back from all the protests and everything else, and I stopped posting on my Facebook page for a little while, and just kind of, I don't know how long it was. It was at least a couple of weeks. It might have been a couple of months that I took out. Was it early this year or late last year? Because I needed to. I just needed to. So yeah, I do have to debrief. I do have to take time out for myself from time to time, and I do that. And at the moment, I'm doing fine. I'm doing okay. I've sort of learned what my tempo is, and I don't push myself past that point. It was months, says Marlon. Yeah, it probably was. And I just had to. I just needed that time. I needed that time. Cal Hughes asks what my thoughts are on nicotine vaping. Vaping with nicotine has proven to be one of the most effective stop smoking aids ever invented. And it is being welcomed around the world, apart from New Zealand and Australia. And New Zealand is better than Australia. We are the worst in the world. Basically making it, criminalizing anyone that wants to stop smoking cigarettes through the use of vaping with nicotine. I think it's an absolute joke. I did a video on it a little while ago. Actually, 2, I think it comes up in 2 of my videos from the past, one on the lifestyle regulation series and one that was actually just specifically about vaping on its own. That was the topic. I think it's absolute madness. We look at the data out of the UK. It is very, very clear that an enormous number of people are using nicotine in a vape to get themselves off the cigarettes. They are far less harmful, according to the UK College of Surgeons. If my memory serves me correctly, they are at least 95% less harmful than cigarettes. So whatever you've heard about vapes, I'm not going to say that they're safe necessarily, but according to the UK College of Surgeons, they are at least 95% safer than cigarettes. So I'm a big fan, a big supporter. And if I had my way, Greg Hunt would be bent over someone's knee and given a good hard spanking for trying to stop people from being able to do it. Camp Creek Hill says I should blend in some pub tests as well. The pub test format is one that I've always wanted to bring back. I so enjoyed it, but it is a lot of work. But now that, excuse me, you would have noticed changes, things like new branding, and now t-shirts and other things. And now there's a bunch of content going out on my pages. I've got people now that are editing my old slow chats, taking clips from those and reposting those up on my page. I've got a small team working for me, 4 people that are working for me part-time. And now that I've got those resources behind me, doing things like pub tests and things become more viable. We'll see in the long run whether it's sustainable and whether I do just want to keep on doing it. But the pub test is a format that I've just always wanted to bring back. It was just so much fun to film. But it never really took off. We didn't get a huge number of views, to be honest. So I kind of took that as a signal that given that it was a lot of work and it wasn't getting a huge number of views, I just kind of went, okay, you know what, I'm going to stop doing that because it was taking up a lot of my resources. So yeah, anyway. Yeah, they tax the tobacco. That's why they don't like vaping. Look, I can't say for sure that that's the motive, but there's no doubt that they certainly depend on the tax revenue from cigarettes, especially because cigars are a very niche thing in Australia. But they depend on the tax revenue from cigarettes just to be able to not even balance the budget because they're not. But there's billions of dollars a year in that. Scott Wilson says 4 staff. You must be raking it in. I wish I was, mate. It's costing me money at the moment. Why do you think I'm trying to sell t-shirts? I'm losing money every month that I continue to do TOFA stuff. You're welcome. I've got lots of people asking me and people demanding to know, what do I think of Ricardo Bossi on Australia One? I don't know. Haven't spoken to the guy. Haven't researched it. Don't know. When I have the chance to actually form an educated opinion, I'll let you know what it is. But I don't just mouth off on nothing. I want to actually know what I'm saying before I say something. Samuel says, hey, Topher, there still needs to be a lot of answers, a lot of questions that need to be answered on the lies that have been told about how the politicians have handled this pandemic. 100%. But here's the thing. We need to stop the bleeding first, right? You don't start an inquiry into how an accident happened while someone's still lying on the floor bleeding out. We've got to stop Daniel Andrews from making things worse and continuing to do the damage that he's done. When we achieve that, then we can turn around and actually start to ask ourselves those questions. I agree, they're incredibly important, but it's more important right now that we deal with the actual problem, and that starts with Daniel Andrews and then works its way down from there. Lisa Marianne wants me to interview Pauline Hanson. I don't know whether she would agree to an interview with me, to be honest. I know, obviously, Malcolm Roberts and I get along very well. I spent a couple of days in a plane with him. I have a lot of time for Malcolm Roberts, who is a One Nation senator. But I have a lot of very big disagreements with One Nation policies. Would she agree to be interviewed? I don't know. I think my focus is really on the issues at hand in Victoria right now. The slow chats, apart from this one, I've made an exception because of everything that's happened in the last couple of days. The slow chats are on hold until we've at least until the documentary is launched, and then I may pick them up again, but it may even be longer than that. I don't know. But when I do pick them up again, I'll be thinking about who are people that I can bring in that I think are going to add value on things that matter. And the things that I think matter surprise some people. And this is probably worth talking about a little bit. There is a tendency for people who are in this space, whatever this is, whatever the hell it is that I do, influencer, if you want to use the, I hate that term, but whatever. Political commentary is what I call what I do. But there is a tendency for people to want to jump on whatever is trending right now. They want to interview the person who's the hot potato right now. I'm not that interested in that. I've never really been pursuing a big audience. For the first 10 years of what I did, I only had an audience of a few thousand people following me on my Facebook page, a few thousand on my YouTube. That was it. It's never been about that for me. And so I find it very difficult to want to jump on bandwagons and interview people where I know, oh, people will click on that. If I interview that person, someone's going to click on that. I want to interview people where I learn something and where anyone that does choose to watch comes away going, you know what? I hadn't been thinking about that, but actually I'm going to start thinking about that now because that's actually important. I would rather do things that are important than things that are sort of trending at the moment. And I know that frustrates some of you. I get a lot of requests. I interview that person, interview this person, and at the moment I don't even have time to look into it. But before I started the documentary, when I did have a bit more time, I'd look into some of these people and go, okay, I can see why they're doing the rounds. I can see why they're being interviewed by lots of people at the moment. But I don't think I can add a lot of value on top of what they've already said. I mean, they're just going to come onto my show to say the same things that they've already said on a bunch of other people's. I'm focused on bringing value and learning something. So that's really my main criteria, if that makes sense. Melissa says, I don't post enough selfies on Instagram to stoop low enough to the level of influencer. Well, maybe that's why I've gained popularity, is the lack of selfies. If I posted more selfies, I think people would leave. So, oops, sorry, that wasn't the one I meant. Nope, I've lost it. Here we go. Heather is obviously replying to somebody, but didn't Tova say he has a cigar business, so he's able to get reductions? Better than reductions. I effectively get these for free. I'm effectively smoking the profits of a cigar partnership that I have with a bloke up in Sydney. So that's why I'm able to have a very expensive hobby because I don't actually have to pay for it, which is nice. The t-shirts, etc. That is what is helping to subsidize the team that I've got working for me. So 4 people part-time that I've got working for me. The t-shirts, the hoodies, all that stuff definitely go towards subsidizing that. But the reality is, I'm losing money on being TOFA at the moment. But I think it's an important moment in Victoria's history. I've only built this team in the last couple of months, right? And in response to what was happening in Victoria and how serious this situation became, I never spent the money before that. But I think it's an investment. I think it's an investment worth making into the future of a state that I love and a city that I love and I would love to grow old in. I'm not 100% sure that I will anymore, but that's what my hope was. And so that's why I built the team. And look, if I can sell enough t-shirts and find other ways of sort of making a bit of money here and there, then I'll keep that team and I'll be able to keep up the tempo of content that you're getting now. Obviously, the documentary was funded by you guys, so thank you for doing that, because that was not possible any other way. But is what I'm doing right now sustainable long term? Not unless I get some revenue somehow. And that's what the t-shirts, the hoodies and things are designed to start that journey. Then in time, who knows, maybe my YouTube channel will become popular enough that'll start to generate some ad revenue, that sort of thing. Who knows? We'll see where this leads. But right now I'm more interested in the fight and trying to win this fight. And then I'll decide when this is over, when this is done and dusted, I'll have a look at where I'm at that point in time and decide, is this what I want to do full time? This was a hobby for me until a few months ago. I'd never taken it particularly seriously, and I've never tried to earn a living out of doing all the TOFA stuff. I love business. I have interests in or shares in a number of different businesses. I recently resigned as a director of one of my businesses because I just wasn't able to devote the time required to it, because I'm devoting all my time over here now. So business is much more my passion than this. I do it because I feel like there's a hole in the current media landscape, and there aren't enough people doing what I do. I would love to be redundant. I would love for there to be no need for my voice, because other people are doing such a good job and covering these things so well that anything I said would just be repeating somebody else. But at the moment, that's not the reality. So here I am. James, thank you for this comment. TOFA, keep doing what you're doing. Your stuff is timeless. Sometimes the only way I can tell when it's from you is how young you look. Yeah. So one of the things that has been really thrilling for me is how well my stuff has actually aged. I mean, I've got stuff from 12 years ago that still holds up, and everything I said still holds up, still 100% relevant, still 100% correct. Can we pre-order the doco? The doco is going to be available for free online. It was funded by you guys. It's not mine to sell. It belongs to you already. So it's going to be available for free online. What I may do, and this would be to help fund TOFA and TOFA's ongoing activities, and I'll be very transparent about that. I may do a limited release of DVDs or Blu-rays or something like that, and get them signed by a number of the people that were involved in the project, and sell those for people that, if you want to have it on your shelf, potentially, I would organize something like that, pretty much as a fundraiser to help me keep doing, excuse me, keep doing what I've been doing. I haven't been drinking enough tea, losing my voice. But at this point in time, no, you can't pre-order the doco because there's no money to pay. It will be available for free to watch online because this doco belongs to you guys. You funded it, you get it. Dan says, I loved your video on church and government. That was Anzac Day this year, April 25th this year. When faith and politics collide as government takes the place of God was the title of that one. That was, I look back at that and again, it holds up well. I don't think I wouldn't revise anything that I said in that particular talk. Okay, lots of people saying that they'd love to get a DVD. Okay, all right. Well, I will shift that from being an idea to being on the list of things to get done. It won't get done till after the doco is released. All my energy is going to go into actually making the doco. DVDs obviously require artwork and so forth, and we'll take care of that once the doco is actually launched and live, and then hopefully people will buy it. How can mandates change from 16-year-olds down to 12-year-olds? Well, how can we have mandates at all in the first place? I don't think we can. I don't think they're actually legal. I don't think they're legally enforceable, but they're treating them like they are, and they'll punish you if you don't comply. So that's kind of your answer. I mean, when they are ruling by force and intimidation, which I would argue is what's happening with all of these mandates, they're ruling by intimidation. They can do whatever the hell they want, and this is why it's so important for us to be standing up, because we can't allow this to go on. We cannot allow what was supposed to be a liberal democracy, not liberal in the sense of the political party and what it's become, but in the sense of freedom, liberalism, as a concept of freedom. We're supposed to be a free democratic country. We're not behaving that way at the moment. And for as long as we actually allow that to continue, we've got a really big problem. And this is why I say we've got to keep fighting. Even when Daniel Andrews is done and dusted, his career is in tatters and his legacy is being washed away, we've got to stay politically active. Ishnis says, it's only because compliers comply that this can happen. Yeah. You know, people comply because they want it to end. It doesn't end because people comply. Like that's the reality. Yeah, this was another project that I think is holding up really well to the test of time. Oh no, sorry, I clicked on it. Moved so fast. Moved again. There we go. Got it. Your video about the forbidden history of unpopular people. Yeah, if you haven't seen that one, watch the forbidden history of unpopular people. The specific legislation that I was dealing with was the proposed News Media Council that came out of a thing called the Finkelstein Report. But if you ignore those specifics that I was talking about, a particular proposal, everything that I said in that video is still 100% relevant today. Has Rukshan been silenced? Not that I know of. Michelle is asking. Oops, I'm getting down to the business end. I'm going to have to not put it down. Not that I know of. He might be taking a few days off, and I would not blame him. That guy works hard. So not that I know of. I've not heard anything to say that that's the case. Okay, Robin says he's on a 24-hour ban. Okay, first I've heard of it. I'll have to reach out to him and find out what's going on with that. Yeah, first I've heard of it. He's posting on Insta. Okay, so if you want to keep up with Rukshan, he's posting on Insta. Over a music issue, apparently. Okay, Tracy, I don't know how you know that, but I'll take your word for it. Apparently banned over a music issue. Okay. He was live last night in Melbourne. Facebook. 36 seconds of commercial music in his life. Oh, man. Ah, dear. Yeah, it's crazy. Anyway, it happens. Unfortunately, it does happen. Let me not lose that one. Ishnis says, where are our First Nation people? They should be out in force. I don't know if you've been watching the live streams from the steps of Parliament, but they have been. They've been there. They held a smoking ceremony there, which would have made a number of heads explode. How these are all meant to be white supremacists, blah blah blah. How come they're there? Well, they're there because they know who we really are, and they are a part of our movement. Absolutely. So I would say they're definitely showing up and supporting what we're doing. Rowan, it's called answering questions. Dribbling on, answering questions. Meh. Tomato, tomato. If you don't want to watch it, don't watch it. They are out in force. Absolutely, they are. So First Nations people, absolutely out in force. Apparently, Rukshan even walked away from the crowd knowing that the music was going to be an issue, I assume is what you're talking about there. And unfortunately, yeah, it's just one of those things. The music that I use in my countdown, which I've been meaning to change, but I haven't got around to yet, I get pinged for a copyright infringement every single time, even though I bought the music off a stock music site. What happens, as far as YouTube is concerned, it was used by the US Tennis Association a few years ago in one of their videos, and YouTube has decided somehow that they own the copyright to that particular music. And so every time I use it, they ping me for copyright and I have to dispute it and say, this is where I bought it from. This is what the track is, blah, blah, blah. So it's all just kind of automated sort of bots, AI working in the background. So I don't think anyone would have targeted him to ban him for that. But it would have been the consequence of that. The smoking ceremony was awesome. Not too far away from a soul girl that was standing holding a BLM sign. Oh, there you go. Is Rukshan 100% legit? Thoughts, Topher? Thank you. Tell him they're dreaming. My favorite troll. Yes, he's 100% legit. And you can do your little laughy face react that you do every time I answer one of your questions. But you know what? Even trolls can be useful sometimes. He is honestly, he is the most legit out of everybody. And he's more important than anyone, myself included. What he has done for this movement is phenomenal. And he has done it genuinely out of just trying to fill a gap in good journalism. There was no good journalism going on. And he went, you know what? I can do that. I can stream. I can show the world what's actually happening. And that's what he's done. And the world has seen in large part. I mean, he's not the only one, but in large part, thanks to him, the world saw what was happening. Yeah, lots of support for Rukshan in the comments. 100%. 100%. After nearly 2 years of this, how is your mental state? Good. I have learned what my limits are. I was commenting on this before. I've learned what my limits are and I operate within them. And that's why, a little while ago, I took a couple of months out. I just needed to. And that's that. Now I've found a pretty good, even with the documentary, I've found a pretty good tempo that seems to be holding me in pretty good stead. So I'm good. Every day is a little bit different, but overall doing very, very well and able to sustain what I'm doing. I'm holding myself at a level that is sustainable for the long term. Thank you for asking. Oops. Am I allowed to attend legal protests? I've been told that I'm allowed to attend the protests that are happening at the moment. That's what I've been told by the police. So I will be there on Saturday and I'll be speaking at the rally on Saturday. The excitement and the progress of the doco definitely does help. It keeps me going. The feedback that I get when I share the clips, the raw, unedited clips of the interviews, is really nice because I look at them and I go, "This is amazing," and then people respond and go, "This is amazing," and it's like, "Yes, good, okay, I'm onto something here." So that's definitely helping me to keep going. But it's long hours, long days. I do have 2 kids that deserve my time as well. Excuse me. So I just have to pace myself. just maintain a tempo that is sustainable for the long term. And that's, I believe I found that. And that's just what I do now. What do I think about Nikolai and his Kovacs? Again, not an area that I've researched deeply enough to want to comment on. I'm aware of it. And certainly anything that isn't mRNA based and is more traditional in its functioning, I think is of interest. But I haven't done enough research really to know much about. Why do you have such hope for the future given the loyalty of Dan's supporters? Because politics is an incredibly fickle beast. And you don't need to change the minds of a large number of people to completely change the political landscape. You only need to change the minds of a relatively small number of people. And this is one of those moments, especially in Victoria, because things have been so hard here for 20 months. If 5, 6, 7% of Victorians changed their voting habits as a result of this and refused to ever vote for the majors again and only supported freedom-friendly minor parties, my personal pick is the Liberal Democrats, not to be confused with the Liberal Party, totally different thing. If 5, 6, 7% of Victoria's population changed how they voted, that would completely reshape politics in this country. So we don't need them to change their minds. We don't need them. We can completely transform this country purely off the backs of the people that are showing up to protests. And if we've got 100,000 people at the protest, there's 1 million people that agree with us. And so I am quite optimistic. And what's going to happen once the documentary is done, my message is going to shift very strongly to being very practical about the upcoming elections. There's a federal election expected in the first half of next year. Between March and May is the most likely window. And there's an election in November for Victoria. And people need that education problem we were talking about before, people need to understand how to make their vote count to the biggest degree possible. We only need a couple of 100,000 people in Victoria to actually start sitting up and paying attention and changing how they vote. And we can completely transform the way politics works in this country. Oh, wow. A lot of comments, guys. Okay. Liberty voting tier list, 100%. Excellent pivot plan. Thank you. All right, guys, I'm starting to fade. We've been going for just over 2 hours, so I'm going to call it a night. My cigar's done. It was beautiful. That was an Oliva V Melanio in the Churchill Vitola, for those that missed it at the start. Thank you so much for joining me tonight. Don't forget, jump on to, let me pump the t-shirts one more time, because apparently I'm a grifter. People keep using that. So let me show them how much of a grifter I am. I'm promoting my t-shirts. What is it? AussieBotStudio.com/Topher Field. T-shirts. There's 5 different designs of t-shirt. There are hoodies now as of today. They literally went live on the website today. They're lovely. They're a really good quality hoodie. Everything is double or triple stitched. I don't know if you'll be able to see that on this camera. Yeah, you can, kind of. So they've got the seam, and then they've actually created additional stitching. So everything's double or triple stitched to make sure that they last. They're a really good hoodie, if I do say so myself. So if you'd like to support what I do and to support the team that I'm now paying for, part-timers that are helping me to increase my output and do what I do, then that would be a great way for you to be able to do that. Yeah, I think that's it for tonight. I will see you on Saturday. Saturday is going to be amazing. Do not miss it. It's going to be one of those days that the people that aren't there will forever be wishing that they had actually gone. It's going to be a great day. So make sure you get there. It's going to be a lot of fun. I'm going to have my film crew with me filming for the documentary Battleground Melbourne. So we want lots of happy faces, lots of smiling people, lots of families, lots of great signs, lots of great chants and songs and all of that stuff to be able to put into the documentary as well. So make sure you get there if you can. Thanks, guys. Really appreciate it. This is one of the ways that I do de-stress and look after my mental health. So I do appreciate you joining me. I appreciate all the comments and all the questions and all the support. You guys are amazing. I really do appreciate it. I will see some of you hopefully on Saturday. Have a great night.